All right. Um, the things I enjoyed most this week were two things. One was the bit about music and its processing, and then two was the bit about concussions. So let's start with music. It wasn't a too large a section, but I still thought it was interesting, to know that the neural basis of all that, right? I mean, I like music. I suppose everyone does. Don't know too many people who don't like any music. But it's just interesting to see that. The bit about music therapy, that was kind of a very interesting thing, right? Just to exercise that bit of the brain. But the one more than that though, the one I like portion like even more was the concussion one. I thought that was particularly interesting. You hear a lot about concussions, right? Quite bad. Admittedly, definitely was under the impression that it was worse than it is. I mean, not that it isn't bad to obviously you don't want a concussion, but Um, definitely didn't. I thought it was a bit more, I don't know, risky than it seems to be. Like I didn't realize that if it's only a concussion and nothing else, that it can actually be healed relatively easily. You know, and good to know that it isn't as severe as it is, and it isn't as severe in the case of football players. I mean, it is can clearly still problems certainly, um, but I suppose it's nice that it's not as bad as sometimes the media might have made it out to be, right? Where you really get a big thing about this, which maybe is well, I suppose it was one of the things we're doing. It's like when we're doing in the assignment of the article interpretation, right? Is the difference in the way these findings, what these findings actually are versus how they're sort of reported in the media, right? Which this was another case where it's sort of like sometimes maybe exaggerated, right? Because that kind of drives engagement more than maybe the more nuanced or the more less exaggerated take would otherwise be. Um, the same joke, and also with all this, something I thought was particularly interesting was I mentioned about how you shouldn't just go into a dark room, right? Even besides like the medical advice, it kind of seems in my mind it's sort of the obvious thing to do, like if you had an injury like that, just sort of being like trying to not like do anything for a little bit. You have the idea that you want to not exert yourself when you're recovering, um, but then you need to do something. Then actually, oh well, you do need to do something because otherwise, you need to have the time to be able to readjust. Otherwise, you don't adjust back to the base level, so it actually takes longer. That reminds me of something similar when I sprained my ankle over the summer. It was really annoying, and for immediately, like 1 or 2 days after, I couldn't really walk on it very well. But after that, it started to get a bit better, and I received very much conflicting advice there because I saw some advice of okay, don't put any weight on it at all, walked as little as possible on it, which is what I ended up doing, but maybe it wasn't the right decision. Certainly took a while to get back to full stuff, and I heard from some other people involved in physical therapy that no, you have to after like the first day, right? You do have to use it because you have to let it be able to recover into its normal motion. And it can't do that if you're not using it. You have to, otherwise, it won't properly be able to regain that motion, at least not for much longer. So it's like a very similar case where at least some of the advice seems to go against the convention, saying no, you do have to use this thing. You have to allow it to be exercise because otherwise it won't recover to the same extent because otherwise the body it needs to be used because that's what forces it to develop back to its normal standard. um so it was like a sort of a similar case there, which I thought was interesting. So and that's all.